I wouldn't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel as researchers, writers, academics, practitioners, I think you can have a good sense when you're putting together a study whether or not it's actually working and whether or not the results are going to be significant enough to warrant public consumption of them. That's kind of what I'm referring to there. Out-of-date work, I feel, can be a little tricky because I don't want to insinuate that if a data set or a method or some results are perhaps a few years old, that there's no longer anything of value in them. That's not what I mean here. I guess what I mean is if you have used a particular methodology and you know your field has moved on to something else, it's been perhaps shown to be not as effective. If you have a data set where the results are perhaps not reflecting current trends, then maybe that work could be considered out of date and there's probably not going to be a lot of interest in publishing it any longer. Now, duplications or part duplications of previously published work, this is a really tricky minefield to navigate. We refer to this in publishing as salami slicing, and it's basically taking your research, your results, and slicing it too finely to really allow for valid individual papers to be published on it. It's not to suggest that you can't publish multiple papers from one study or one set of results. You absolutely can, but you need to make sure there's clarity amongst what you have already published on this topic, so those earlier papers, and how this particular paper that you want to publish does tell something original and does show something significant. So it can be tricky, and you can be finding your way through a real ethical minefield if you're trying to cut that research too thinly. And there's a few things for you to think about carefully publishing. So something to weigh up for yourself. Preliminary results. Are they perhaps still too inconclusive? Are they maybe not telling enough to be really useful in that original and significant way that editors are looking for? Replication of results, but in a different system, does kind of tap into that duplication or part duplication of work. Again, you need to be really careful. And the big question then to ask yourself from all of that is, where can I best publish these? And we're going to come to that in a second, but I want to cover first some really practical things that you can do when you're writing your paper. And a lot of this taps into search engine optimization, which you might not have thought too much about yet, but this is about the discoverability of your paper. We know that around 60% of people who are going to find your paper are going to come to it via some kind of search engine. And so you need to think in terms of how best they're going to be able to find it using the kinds of methods or the kinds of algorithms that a search engine would. You need to be really strategic, and you need to think about it not just in terms of the content of your paper, but when you're writing your title and when you're writing your abstract and when you're selecting your keywords. So the key, I guess, across everything is consistency. So for example, when you're writing your title, you want to select maybe 2 to 3 keywords. And when you're trying to identify these keywords, think about what you yourself may actually type into a search engine to find research on your topic. Because there's a good chance you're not going to be alone in that. Other people are going to use those same keywords. So make sure they're in your title to make it really easy for that search engine to boost your paper in its results. In terms of your abstract, think about it in terms of when you do a general search result on a general search on a search engine, and how you kind of get about 1 to 2 lines of information around the result. Be strategic and think about those first couple of lines of your abstract. Make sure your key results or findings are there, and you also include your keywords. It's going to tie in with your title, it's going to show consistency, and it's going to make sure that when people are looking through hundreds, if not thousands of results from those keywords that they've typed in, that yours is going to stand out, because it's going to be really clear that your paper is what they're looking for. And the same goes for choosing your keywords. You've got more scope here. You'll be asked to come up with a list of about 7 to 9. And again, you want to make sure those are also featured in your title and your abstract. As I've said a couple of times, consistency really is key. Now, having said all that, there is taking it too far. You can go a step too far, and we refer to that as keyword stuffing. I'm not sure how professional this is, but I have a non-academic example that comes to mind when I think of this kind of thing. And it's when you're looking for perhaps some kind of item to buy on Amazon or some other kind of online shopping platform, and you might just type in black pants, for instance, and you'll notice the item will have about 20 to 25 adjectives it's used to describe black pants, every possible word they could use to try to capture as many people's search results as possible. I keep meaning to add a screenshot of that so it doesn't sound completely ridiculous, but that is what they do. And search engines have, I can't speak exactly to how Google work, they obviously keep that pretty secret, but they do have ways of detecting keyword stuffing. So if it looks unnatural, if you've included too many words, if it's not consistent, if it doesn't seem to really make sense, you do risk your paper being kind of D or unindexed in that regard, and it won't feature as prominently in the search results. So there's some things to think about. I'm going to come back to building links. That kind of ties more into promoting your work, but it's basically about getting as many people as possible to share your work, because that again indicates to search engines, hey, people are really interested in this. We probably want to show it to more people. I want to start to cover now how to go about choosing a journal, and this includes looking at a journal's aims and scopes, quality standards, and kind of, without wanting to put anyone off, being realistic in your choices. And there's a few things to think about in that regard. So I'll flag first a couple of resources that I think are worth looking into further when you're trying to find information on how to choose a journal and how to choose a quality journal as well, especially because as we see the rise of open access journals, they can on the surface look really similar, particularly in terms of their business models, to predatory journals or predatory publishers, because both do operate on a kind of a user pay, a pay for publication model. But there are some tools and resources that you can use to easily detect if you're looking at a potential predatory publication. The Directory of Open Access Journals is one of them. This is a regularly updated, well-regarded website of legitimate, so these are peer-reviewed, quality, open access journals. A great resource. Beals, which I've realised I don't have a link to, sorry, I'll add that before we send these slides around. But Beals publish a list of predatory publishers. They have a whitelist and a blacklist. I'm not sure if both are current, but the blacklist definitely is. It was last updated in December. And this is a list of journals and publishers that they've identified as being predatory. And I'll just explain, in case you're not familiar, what I'm talking about with predatory publishers or predatory journals, and even predatory conferences. They're basically, the people behind them are out to try to get your money, and they will manipulate you in terms of, well, sometimes a lot of it just comes down to really flattering you as researchers. This will be the case of perhaps sending you a cold email that says, "Dear so-and-so, I heard your paper at X conference. We would love you to submit a paper to our journal." That kind of thing can feel really flattering, and it's not always of concern necessarily, but it is worth taking a moment to question and to do some research on whether the person that is sending you the email is legitimate and the publication they're claiming to represent is legitimate as well. So do take some time. You don't want to risk any potential black marks on your academic career or publishing career by publishing in a predatory journal, and there will always be a fee associated with it. And the tricky thing about them is they look really professional. It's not like a basic, I don't know the language to describe websites, but they're not like basic websites. They look really legitimate. And they will also include things like lists of fake editorial boards that could often include big names in your field. So they can look legitimate. I was sent some links the other day by a colleague, and it was for a predatory conference that was actually copying a genuine society conference happening around the same time. And to be honest, I thought the predatory conference website looked more professional and put together than the official society's one. No offense to them, but it does show how slick they actually are, with all kinds of links and information and maps and notes on keynote speakers. It was really quite incredible. So it is about spending some time to think about this, because it is a big issue in publishing. So another resource I wanted to mention is Think, Check, Submit. This is a great website. It's basically going to give you a checklist. I do have a screenshot a little bit later that's a bit more informative than this tiny little image just here, but it's basically a checklist of questions for you to ask yourself and for you to ask of the journal and perhaps your colleagues that'll just give you some insight into what this journal is and how you can critique it before you think about submitting to it. So I guess that's the dark side of publishing, but where to look in terms of getting information about the journals themselves. So every journal will have a set of aims and scopes. It will have an overview. That information will be easily discoverable on the journal's website. I'll show you a screenshot later of what Wiley's online publishing platform, Wiley Online Library, looks like. And what's handy about that, and handy about every other publisher's website, is you get to go to the same place to find that information, so it's nice and easy. And what the aims and scope is going to give you is a nice summary of exactly the kind of research the journal wants to publish. You'll probably have to look in the author guidelines section for the specific manuscript types, but this will be an overview of the kind of research. So not the paper type, but what they're actually looking for in terms of the scope of their field. And you want to pay attention to that, because that's what editors know their journals better than anyone else, obviously, and they're the ones making that first decision on your paper. And you don't want to risk a desk rejection, so not even getting to go to peer review, simply because you haven't met the journal's aims and scopes. And and if it's not clear how you're going to meet those aims and scopes, then as I said, that would be an instant desk rejection. And you can have a clear opportunity in your cover letter to really make it obvious to the editor how exactly your paper fits in. And that information is easy to find. I've already covered quality standards. Now, in terms of being realistic, I often feel a little bit awkward about this, because I don't want to, I feel like it's not about putting anyone off aiming to publish in a high impact journal, for instance, but there are some things to think about. And one of them is timing. If a journal doesn't have a great time to publication, if authors are waiting for a long time, then that can be worth considering, whether it's valuable to you to spend your time and have your research kind of sitting in limbo for that journal. You can find information like that out from the editorial office. Generally their contact information will be on the website, but that's one thing to think about. And also, in terms of those really high impact, top of the field journals, because they receive so many submissions, their acceptance rates tend to be quite low. It can be around 5% or less acceptance rate, which is pretty extraordinary when you think about the volume of papers that they receive. It can be thousands per year. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is to perhaps consider the middle range journals that still publish quality journals with the same quality standards of peer review, that receive less submissions and have a higher acceptance rate because of it. Those are still valuable and will still be a significant contribution to your resume and research career as well. So when you're looking for how to create that shortlist of journals that you may want to think about publishing in, a great place to start is really your reference list. You know, what are you reading and citing, and what kind of research are those authors citing? So that's a great place to start. And you can be really practical in terms of, you know, creating an Excel sheet with names of journals and what papers you want to submit, and when you did, and when the last communication was, and what stage in the review process it may be up to. Be really strategic. It's almost like another job, being a researcher and trying to get published. On top of all of the other jobs you're already doing, you can think of this one as another one. Have a look at recent papers that the journals have published. It's going to give you insight into whether they're publishing on any kind of hot topics, and that perhaps your research can tackle.